Thank you very much for joining us at the Sign Hub today. My name's James Matthews-Paul. I am the editor-in-chief of Output magazine, which hopefully a few of you will have come across. If you haven't, then there's some copies in the magazine dump at the start of the show. Just to give you a brief intro into who I am, I launched Output 5 years ago now because we saw that visual communications as a whole space was changing. So the sign business is changing, the way of what we print and why we print it is changing. We see emerging technologies and digital signage all coming into that, and so Output has a kind of an interesting, we think, different slant on how the market is evolving and where it's going. And we're going to touch on that today in our panel, which was billed as threats to the sign maker. I'd like to talk about threats and opportunities because I think there's actually a lot more positive going on in this market than that title might belie. And I am very happy to have two cracking gentlemen who are going to discuss this market with me. On my right, I have David Kynaston, who is a traditional sign writer and has been at it for decades. He'll tell us a little bit more about what he does in a sec. And on my left, I have John Telling, who's sales director of Perfect Colours, which is one of the biggest resellers in the UK of sign and display producing equipment. So, chaps, I wonder if you, David, would you mind just giving us a quick rundown of who you are and what you do?
Okay, yeah, thanks. Thanks for the intro, James. I'm David Kynaston. I'm from North Wales, and I'm a traditional sign writer and have been for 27 years. And although I've worked occasionally with vinyl and things, I've stuck to my guns, and I just love to paint signs, and that's what I do day in and day out. All my signs are hand painted. That's what my customers want me to do, and work is great. It seems to be thriving these days.
And out of interest, just a quick fire one. Are there any threats to your business, do you think?
I don't think so. I think it's seen a change. It went through a bad patch, obviously, when vinyl became a lot more fashionable, let's say 15 years ago or so, and all of the vehicle trade and everything like that stopped for me. But now I've embraced heritage work, and there's more and more people interested in getting to learn sign writing and learn how to do hand-painted signs and more so the big companies have sort of embraced that and realised there is still a place for the traditional sign writer. So it all seems great.
Couldn't agree more, and it sits well alongside everything going on in digital print and that side of things. John, what's your experience in this market? Where have you come from to it, and what does Perfect Colours do?
Okay, so personally I've been in the market for about 17 years. I've been the sales director of Perfect Colours for about 3.5 years. Obviously seen some massive changes in the signage market. As a business, we have about 70 staff. We have 6 branches throughout the UK. The business is growing and doing very well, which I'm sure we'll come on to a bit later on. But there's certainly some big changes to be aware of in the market, which could be seen as threats or could be seen as opportunities, but I'm sure we'll get to that later on.
And in terms of, I think when we were talking earlier, we were saying that on the traditional side, actually there are lots of people coming into that industry. What do you think about the sign plotting and that kind of digital production side?
Well, certainly our customers are telling us that there's definite skills gap. They're not getting enough young people in at the bottom end to learn the skills that are going to take us through to the next stage. And as a business, Perfect Colours are also suffering the same problem. We're all getting older and older and older, including myself. You know, I'm looking around the show, we've got grey hair going on, you know, we're all overweight, all those things. And we're just not getting enough young blood in. I don't know really what the answer is, but it's been very, very difficult to get youngsters and apprentices into the print business.
And it's funny because actually the digital plotting side and the vinyl side of sign making, you'd think that's quite accessible because younger people tend to be quicker with digital technology maybe. You'd think it's quite an easy sort of in for them, wouldn't you?
Yeah, I don't know if it's one of those things where for young people it's just not sexy enough. I think, you know, that media has taught a lot of young people much more sexy careers than perhaps sign making or printing. I think they've probably got to experience a bit more to understand that it can be a really fun thing to be into.
I think that there are a lot of opportunities in design, and I think people are really, one thing that really is sexy is the design that goes behind the signs and displays that we use. I mean, would you say that, David, that maybe that's the hook, that's the thing that we should be using? Because let's face it, when we have designed a sign and when it is out in the public space, it's hugely visible. It's one of the most visible things that you can create as a designer or a creative, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's no doubt. But I think the design is everything. You know, it doesn't matter how well it's executed from my point of view. It's got to be designed right. And I think why we've got so much of an interest in the sign writers now is we've gone into a world where we've got so involved with fonts and clip art, and it's got so incredibly clever that it's almost too complicated for people to use. They're making mistakes. They don't know where to place one thing for the other. So they're looking back how the old traditional sign writers used to do it, and that sort of work is becoming fashionable again. People can see, well, actually, yeah, that was a good way of doing it. That was a good way of doing it. And I think the design is everything. You know, there's a lot of the simplest signs. There's a lot more to it. There's a lot more people understand this. It's the design is everything, you know, and I think you're right there, James.
I mean, as a publisher, it's interesting because we obviously have rules about when we use a serif font or when we use a sans serif font, and you know, it used to be that you could back in the days of plotting, it was all about the fonts that you could pick and that you could actually scale, wasn't it? Now there's hundreds of thousands of them, and so with that maybe diversity of choice. Is it complicated to teach someone that innate design skill when there is just so much complexity in what they can do?
Okay, well, for me, I mean, I run sign writing courses. I do them through a company called Better Letters, and after here, I'm off to Berlin to do a course up there. And what I teach is the classical Roman letters, which the Romans taught us 2,000 years ago, and the copper plate, and everything in a way is based around that, all the shapes and everything. And I say to people, if you can learn that, learn the rules, understand every little bit, everything will become obvious. And if I make up a sign, I only have 2 or 3 styles. I don't really have fonts, and I adapt and change and just juggle them about just a little bit for each and every sign. Just use a bit of clever colour, and then it all comes together.
So actually keeping it simple and using the right principles is kind of core to this, isn't it? And so maybe is it true that on the vinyl plotting and on the digital side we do just have too much choice, John?
I think so. I think that the sort of separate things here. I think you've got the design process, which David is talking about, and some signage companies have great contact with that, and some don't. So, you know, some signage companies are only printing what they're given, and some design their own. So whether or not a sign maker has real control over that, I think is an arguable thing. When I see some truly great signage out in the market, I see some very poor signage out in the market. So, you know, it depends on what the source of that was. Are we saying, do we have the skills in-house in signage companies? I'm not so sure we have as much skill as I'd like to see in actually the design process, because I think there's some truly great things that could be done.
It's funny, isn't it? Because actually you would think that these two markets should be a lot closer together. And, you know, I can think of a handful of sign makers in the UK where they do still have very reasonably sized sign fabrication departments, you know, working with channel letters, trough lighting, not sign writing maybe per se, but, you know, that do have that side and have diversified into print. Do you think, we keep saying over the last couple of years, you know, pre-press departments, there's a good opportunity for them to expand more their design services. Have you actually seen that amongst the Perfect Colours customer base?
I think some, and certainly some customers I was talking to last night had certainly done that. And what they'd also done, instead of using, you know, just self-adhesive vinyl and the more traditional printing methods, they'd really thought outside the box, both in terms of their design process, and the processes they were using were amazing. And some of the profit streams they were generating were incredible. So I think there is an opportunity, but I think for the more traditional self-adhesive vinyl, I think those guys are coming under a lot of pressure.
I mean, what do you see looking at that industry from the outside, David? Well, not quite from the outside, but because obviously you'll work alongside, perhaps in collaboration or as part of a larger project for sign and display. But what's your view of the side of the industry that John works in?
I mean, I've worked alongside vinyl companies, modern companies. I tend to call them vinyl companies because I can go back that sort of far. But modern digital print companies like that. There is quite a difference, but I mean, it's great when we can work together, of course. again, the design is everything, and we're fortunate with sign writers now. We've got a lot of people have got interested in wanting to become sign writers again, and I think because people have got so saturated with the digital side of it, and they just need a bit of a fresh sort of look. But at the same time, they're still interested in the digital, and I think there's a place really for almost larger digital companies to have a sign writer working there these days. Certainly because the work demand is there. Sign writers who I know have a job to keep up with the amount of work out there. And some of the people who I know also do digital printing as well. So it's to get them to work in hand and to see a sign which has got a combination of digital printing and then maybe a little bit of hand painted on the side is a great combination. They've had a few good heads thinking about it, and it really works well. We've got to be open to look at all different sort of ideas and not dismiss things, I think.
Out of interest, do you use any software? Do you use any kind of computerization when you're say visualizing what you're going to do, to visualize the sign in situ or anything like that, or even just to be more streamlined in the processes, the materials that you're using? Does that come into it at all?
Well, I've certainly tried with all sorts of things, and it does in some extent, but only from the point that I still hand draw all my designs, because the presentation of that looks great to customers because they're not used to seeing hand drawn designs. But after I hand draw them, I tend to scan them into the computer. I might put them in Photoshop and just put a nice border around them so that they're well presented. But that's about it, really. I don't use the fonts and things off them, but it all works.
But actually, the design skill is up in here.
The design has always got to be in the mind. No matter how much is on the computer, you always design in your mind, and then you can only press the buttons.
Which is funny, because then looking at what's going on the software side, on your side of the business, actually, Perfect Colours resells 3 of the largest RIP packages that are available and some of the most diverse. We're actually seeing, on that side, the software really move back forward towards the design area, aren't we?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're a reseller for a product called GMG. So you've probably all heard of that. And certainly it has a big design tools element in it. And for some customers, if they want to try and extract costs out of workflows and cut down the time from when they get work in to getting work out, the GMG can be a really good solution. So instead of lots of time in, photoshopping, they can just put it into GMG and make changes. But I think David's point is really valid, because I think what we're talking about here is signage as art. And I think, to confuse the issue, handwritten signs are art. But I think a forgotten thing is digital signage is also art. And certainly the most profitable of our customers look at signage as art and certainly set their businesses up as sort of art companies that do signage, and they're really successful.
One of the things that surprised me most over the last sort of 7 years that I've been writing in this industry is, Output is very heavily involved online with social media. We create a lot of our own YouTube videos, and we also try and create kind of a bit of a library of what we see out there as well. And interestingly, I barely see any videos about printed signage, but I see a huge amount about sign writing. And it's funny, I think that really ties into it, doesn't it? I mean, retro is kind of coming back. We've got a panel on this tomorrow. But do you think that because on the computerized side, we're failing to kind of emulate that sort of, that hand-generated quality? Do you think that that's, I don't know, it's funny how the traditional side is somehow more popular with a younger audience when we'd expect it maybe to be the other way around?
I think it's something we were talking about earlier, but I think hand-drawn signage is quite sexy, and someone, watching someone hand-draw something is amazingly spectacular. But to watch a piece of self-adhesive vinyl printing on a machine, there are a million videos of that online. Is that very sexy? The image, you can't really get a hold of the image online or in that video. So I agree. I think it's more of a sexy thing. Whether one's better than the other is probably what this presentation is all about.
I think when we're applying vinyl, I mean, if it's being used for some really kind of, I don't know, it's about scale or something like that, isn't it? That's when it becomes impressive. Yeah. Whereas, I think we are always just fascinated, David, aren't we, with someone who has that that skill that we just don't have ourselves. I cannot. I mean, my handwriting is bad enough.
So is mine.
And but that's bizarre, isn't it?
Yeah,
And actually,
well, yeah.
You know, that's quite interesting. But do you think that it is just our fascination with somebody that is able to do that manually with precision and with expertise? Is that what's attracting people?
I think it is really. I think we're in a day and age where people just don't expect it anymore. You know, people just type and text all the time, and they're just not. They don't think it can happen. And a lot of the people who come on my courses are generally people. Let's say they're in their 20s, 30s, 40s. They've got an office job through the week. They're on computers, and they just want to get back to using their hands and just finding some sort of a hand skill, really, you know, and I think that's what it is.
It's very, we're seeing the same thing in so many different areas, even sewing, embroidery, you know, knitting, all of these kind of, you know, all of these handcrafts are really
Let's
making
do that.
a comeback.
Let's knit.
Let's knit. So, I mean, out of interest, I write quite a lot about how digital screens and emerging technologies are affecting sign and display. And one of the things that strikes me is that actually handwritten signs and displays can actually combine with emerging technology theoretically.
Oh, yeah.
Do you see any of that coming about? Have you been asked to interact with beacons or NFC or?
I mean, we're doing, as sign writers, we're doing work for corporate companies now, big companies, you know, because they want it. And of course, they've already got their routine, mass-produced, modern, digital printed signs everywhere, but they'll still want a little bit of input from the sign writer there. So it almost makes their company look a little bit more organic. They've got a bit of hand care and everything like that in it. So I mean, we're working all alongside modern companies like that all the time in some senses of the word. And it's great.
And it can't really be replaced, can it?
No, I don't think so. I think it's tried to be replaced, and of course we've got all the different fonts and things. But I think people think, well, we used the sign writer years ago. They were fine. We've moved on to the digital technology. But if there's one available, we can phone him up. He can come and do the job. Then why not?
Yeah, on the other side of things, and not to give you all the negative stuff to talk about, John, but you know, it's a maelstrom, isn't it? You know, for a smaller sign or display business, you know, first of all, they've adapted to digital print. Now they're being told they've got to get into software to streamline. Then you've got digital screens, digital signs that are coming along, and you know, maybe possibly taking a share of work off them, or they're being told that they can sell it as well. Then you've got NFC and tap and beacons. You know, is it just too much, and is that why, you know, it's more difficult on that side?
Well, I think basically we're all talking about the same thing. What we're talking about here is skill and ability to make the image. Now, the debate here is about how are we actually producing the image? How is it being put together? Now, David's doing it, you know, by hand. He's a craftsman. We're doing it digitally. But the successful businesses that we deal with are people who are really, really creative and create really good work. Don't forget, digital is only a means of producing an image. It's not an answer. It doesn't get round. People still need skill to do these things. When we were talking earlier about the skills gap in the industry, our problem is people's skill and ability to produce this artwork or these images. So I think we're really on the same page here.
I think so too. I mean, what can we do? I mean, one of the things that frustrates me about the industry is that there isn't really much of a kind of a helicopter view. You know, there aren't any organisations that pull everything together. And you know, is that what we're going to need in order to promote traditional sign writing, which is more popular, computerized sign making, which is struggling maybe a little bit? Do we need something at the top of this industry to pull all of those strands together to make it more interesting for younger people?
Well, I think somewhere like this would be perfect. I think if something like this had an area where we could show and we could display hand-painted signs and how we could use those alongside modern signage, and someone like John and me could be working on the same sort of stand and show that combination at a show like this would be fantastic.
Would you be up for that, John?
Right, I think so. And an idea that pops into my head while we've been having this conversation is there an opportunity to mix the two things? Yeah. Could we have half a digitally printed images that has hand finishing? I have seen some of that.
Why not?
And the image is really successful.
Yeah, absolutely. And we can work off, we can work off designs, everything like that. I mean, there's no doubt about it. John's absolutely right.
I think mixed media is also something that really grabs people's attention, and that to combine something that is maybe digitally printed onto some kind of clever or interesting substrate, and is combined with hand finishing, or maybe we just need to showcase more projects where companies that do have those skills, both of them in house, are kind of doing something more creative and more different. And one thing that I would like to touch on as well, we're not going to hang on for too much longer until we ask you guys if you have any questions, but out of interest, how many lady sign writers are there, do you come across? Is it a male-dominated industry, or is it quite well split?
Yeah, I would say there's probably, if I go by, let's say, the workshops, which I do, there's generally 20-25% of them are ladies on there. Yeah, so that's great. It's absolutely a place for ladies. I mean, my daughter, I would love to think she'll be a sign writer one day. If she doesn't, it doesn't matter. But no, there's plenty.
Which is interesting. So I suspect
great.
if you held the same kind of event on the digital side, it would probably be a smaller percentage, wouldn't it?
I think that's true, but it has changed and is changing. And more interestingly, you don't just find women finishers and designers, because the designers is definitely the more traditional roles for women, but more and more out in the industry I see company owners that are women, and I don't mean that in a patronising way like I'm surprised. It's just something sort of over the last few years that has grown, and I think that's a really good thing. I
think actually, just to pick up on that point, some of the company we've seen, obviously across the sign and display and the wide format print industry, have all seen companies phase out over the last 8 years during the recession period. But we are seeing newer companies come along, and actually quite a lot of the newer companies that are run by women tend to be focusing on an individual space with an individual solution, and there are more female entrepreneurs. But is there anything we should be doing to appeal to younger women specifically, to show them that there is a place in the industry for them?
I think it comes back to our point earlier. It's men and women. We need to get both into the industry at the bottom end. Do we need a proper apprenticeship? A proper apprenticeship scheme? Yes, we definitely do. We need ways of getting these younger people into our industry, because I'm telling you now, in 5 to 10 years, we're going to have a massive problem.
I completely agree. The average age in the industry in the UK is about 48,
wow.
With the mean falling above that. So if you think about it, there's a lot of skill being lost, or that's about to be lost at the top end, that isn't being handed down to a younger generation. Is it the same in the traditional side, do you think?
Well, you see, it went through a phase where there was no sort of... it just went. All sign writers were older people. They were in their 60s or 70s, but now all of a sudden it's the younger generations have sort of embraced this. They know that there's the work out there, and they come in on the courses and they're learning. So I think all of a sudden we're going to fill up that marketplace with sign writers again. There seems to be so many out there, and I think the other appeal is, of course, is the setup cost. They can do a weekend workshop for a few £100, few €100. They can buy some brushes, they can buy the paint, and they're away in a sense. And that's appealing, because it's a big cost setting up with the digital.
What sort of are you familiar with any vocational qualifications that can be done in traditional sign writing?
Yeah, there's no official qualifications at the moment. There was. I started off doing a City and Guilds 27, 28 years ago, but that's sort of finished now. But I think that as long as you can get a bit of training, a bit of understanding, an apprenticeship if possible with a sign company, then that's fine. That's all you need, really.
John, on your side?
Not that I'm aware of, but you might tell me different.
No, you're right, there aren't any.
I think, if you look around this show, you can see how complex the technology has become. And that's for, some market forces. We're all trying to be greener. We're all trying to cut costs out of our business. And that means that our level of knowledge has to increase. That means education has to increase. Now, how we do that, obviously dealers like ourselves are a very big part of trying to educate our customers on how to drive cost out of their business. If it wasn't our job to try and find solutions to customers to make more money, drive costs out of their business, become greener, then we wouldn't have a business. But obviously, we can't do everything on our own. It's not just down to dealers, it's down to a whole plethora of educational messages, perhaps official qualifications that could really help drive these things.
It's interesting because the two real themes of this, as we come to the wrap up, are younger people and design, without a shadow of a doubt. Though that's the biggest threat and the biggest opportunity right there. Now, I mean, I wonder if the kind of qualification should actually be about signing, no matter of what the end purpose, what the actual process is to create it, and maybe we should look at a qualification that combines the traditional side and the more modern side.
Yeah, I think as I was saying earlier, signage, how you output the signage isn't really, yes, it's very relevant in our business, but it's still one thing. David has got a process, we have several different processes. It's all the same thing. What we need is qualifications in signage, in design, and all the things we were talking about.
What do you think, David? Do you think that a qualification that talks really about the essence of what a sign is, why we want it there, how we design it, and then the various endpoints to get there, whether that is through a hand-based skill or whether it's through a computerized area, do you think that could be something that's more of a draw for younger people?
Yeah, I think the design is absolutely everything, regardless of how it's made, whether it's painted or carved or digital printed or sandblasted or whatever. The design is everything, and I think courses need to focus on that. People need to understand, and when I go and see a customer, everything is about getting that sign to work for that person, regardless of how the sign is finished. It's got to work. If it doesn't, it's not worth them paying for it.
And if you had one piece of advice for a traditional sign maker doing their SWOT analysis, what would it be?
Look after your customers and listen to what the customers want before you go and design something yourself.
And John?
I think it's what I was saying earlier, really. Obviously, I do reiterate what David said. Design, massive creativity, be niche, don't go general because everyone's doing the same thing. Try and do something that's different to everybody else. Obviously, use technology to try and drive costs out of your business. It's very important. Try and be as green as possible because it will appeal to your customers.
I agree, and from my perspective, keep reading the trade press.
Of course.
We're here for a reason, and that's to showcase some great projects, whether they're produced using digital technologies or whether they're produced using traditional methods. Are there any questions? Sean?
Hi there. The big challenge with sign writing is the fact that you couldn't necessarily make signs as quick as a new technology or new age sign maker. The other challenge is the fact that because they can make it quicker and they can make pretty signs, sign writers can't meet that expectation and have the challenge of being able to limit their costs because it's a time-consuming process.
No, I agree on certain aspects of that, especially with mass-produced signs. I mean, we haven't got a chance. But it's surprised now people underestimate the speed that a sign writer can work sometimes. I sometimes think, well, by the time you cut all that out, I've tried it on weeding little letters sometimes, trying to pull them all out, and it's all gone wrong. And I think, I'll just get out the paintbrush and just paint it, it'll done. So it's 6 of one, half a dozen the other. But, it just depends. I mean, we've all had it ourselves when we phoned up companies to order something, and they just don't get it done. So, but there's a good point there, but a lot of sign writers, they work quick, and I give people realistic deadlines. I turn things around as quick as I can. But you can't beat the speed of a machine doing things. But you'd be surprised how quick we can move on times when we need to. Pardon? How do I make money? I make plenty of money. I'm fine. I make enough money to pay my bills, to be able to come away, to have... It's absolutely fine. I've got some very, very good customers. I do a lot of heritage work. We're a niche market, sign writers. My customers, last year I did work on a Rolls Royce. I did work for Sultan of Brunei, painting vintage fire engines. I also did local no parking signs. I do such a huge range of work. So it's business is really good. It's really good actually, and that's what I'm saying. It's there for us,
John, what do you
Thank
say
you.
to that speed of turnaround and that kind of aspect?
I mean, something we probably didn't cover in this presentation, but we are talking about different things because David's stuff is niche. You know, you're not going to compete with a machine doing 300 square metres an hour. It's just two different things. Production signage is a totally different area. You know, where we sort of started this conversation was looking at sort of 1-2 offs on digital signage versus what David does. In terms of production, no, you're never, ever, ever going to compete. You could have roomfuls of people and they would never, ever compete with a machine, as I say, doing 300 square metres an hour or doing 100, 200, you know, boards an hour. It's just not in the same. It's just not in the same league.
But then conversely, then it's not the same thing as one person ordering one unit, and you can see that someone has spent an hour, hours or a day or 2 days on it. So it's horses and courses, I think, and you know, it's very different processes to create two very different but ostensibly, you know, useful and creative, beautiful things.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like car production. You know, if you buy trying to think of a more European brand, perhaps a Ford or something, you know, these cars are made in hundreds and thousands every single day. But do they produce a Rolls-Royce or a Bentley? How many of those do they make a day? It's far fewer. And I think that's a good comparison because people who want David's work want real, you know, high-end quality. They're willing to pay for something a bit better because, you know, from what David's told us, his labour ain't cheap. So I think that's how you've got to look at it. In terms of impact on the market, I think the hand stuff is growing, but will it ever really be a rival? No, but they will live together pretty well, I think.
Yeah.
Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think that's fair enough. You know, I mean, all the sign writers I know, they have plenty of orders. They're booked up for weeks or maybe months, and I think how we price sign writing is, we basically give people an idea. We find out what their budget is. We have an idea of what we want to earn an hour, and I think that's it. We're just doing a trade or a profession, as we like to think. So it's fine. You know.
Are there any other questions? In which case, thank you very much for coming along to this Sign Hub talk. It's been absolutely fantastic to have you here. Thanks very much to John Telling and David Kynaston. Thank you all for being here and have a fantastic show.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.